90.3 WHPC now presents Law You Should Know. The law affects every aspect of our lives, our home, our jobs, and our recreational activities. Now, learn about the law and how to protect yourself against the loss of your liberty or property, and learn how to stand up for your rights and seek compensation when you have been wronged. Your host for Law You Should Know is attorney Kenneth J. Landau, a past dean of the Nassau Academy of Law, and frequently lectures to lawyers on ethics and avoiding problems with clients, and to the public on how to choose and use lawyers. This is Law You Should Know on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hi, this is Ken Landau, and welcome to Law You Should Know. Today we're going to discuss white-collar crime and punishment, and our special guest is attorney Shekar Jayaraman. He's of counsel to the firm of Grant Park Legal Advisors in Chicago. So he's talking about the law in general, some federal crimes, and the exact definition of crimes may vary a little bit across the country, but some of the issues and defenses are the same. Shekar, welcome to Law You Should Know.
Hey, Ken, thanks so much for having me.
And there have been many white-collar crimes in the news, and there'll be more trials coming up in 2024. Recently, we saw the trial and conviction of Sam Bankman-Fried, and essentially what got him into trouble, what defenses did he possibly have, and what lessons does that teach all of us when we're dealing with business matters and financial matters, et cetera?
Absolutely. I mean, and so the thing is, and I caveat this with, I've had a pretty busy schedule this past week, so I haven't really delved too deep into the matter. But, I think a lot of what the lessons, I could just dive straight into the lessons here, is that, when you are dealing with any sort of field, whether it's law, finance, any sort of regulated field, or irregulated fields that are not regulated, you want to make sure that you're observing all of the accounting procedures and compliance standards to the best that you possibly can. And this is where I think, the defendant in this matter really kind of maybe got carried away. And, the thing is, if you try to shirk the system a little bit here and there and it works, people start getting carried away and they keep getting away with it until, it kind of turns into a mountain. So in this case, there was a lot of money funneling around. He was committing it seems like he was committing quite a bit of fraud. And so, and that's what the conviction proved, that, he was taking money from people and kind of misappropriating it, and also proved the system to be a little bit weak. And so even though despite the fact that there's a lot of compliance that needs to be observed, not just within the cryptocurrency world, but just generally speaking. So, I always advise people that when you're starting a business, make sure you get an accountant, make sure you get an attorney, and follow all the procedures and compliances as buttoned up as possible, and keep very meticulous records of everything. That'll help you stay out of trouble as much as possible.
And if you're an investor or you're someone else being asked for money, being asked to help a startup, to being sold securities, you also must retain a knowledgeable attorney and maybe an accountant to see what's going on and investigate the proposed purchase. Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more.
And, I represent clients here in Illinois in a number of different ways. And when I do have clients that are looking to invest or looking to do anything of that nature, I want to see as much as I can possibly see. I want to see as much as whomever they are going to invest with or for or into. I want to see as much of their books. I want to see as much of their operating agreement, any agreements that company might have with other people, other entities. I want to know everything about this entity that my client might potentially invest in. It's important, especially in the mergers and acquisitions world, or when someone's wanting to become a franchisee of a corporation, whether it be a restaurant or anything of that nature. You want to make sure that whomever you're investing in, whatever you're investing in, is as buttoned up as you intend to be.
Right. Even if someone you know has been a financial advisor or an old friend and they have this perfect idea for making money for you and for them, and they're asking you to invest a lot of money or perhaps put in your retirement savings, you need your own knowledgeable attorney and financial advisor to scrutinize that for you. Otherwise, you could be,
Absolutely.
taking a big risk and risking your retirement and all your assets, because if there's something phony about the scheme, there's not going to be anything to recover.
Absolutely. And same holds true for the real estate world. Any times monies are going in or out, I couldn't echo your sentiments more.
And it's worth the cost of a financial advisor, an objective, knowledgeable financial advisor, and a lawyer who understands the nuances of that type of business.
Absolutely.
Just on a broader level, what are some common, white-collar crimes and that get the perpetrator into trouble and perhaps some other people who put money into the business or the scheme and may lose their money or may have other more severe consequences? Yeah, I mean, some really common ones are fraud, embezzlement, racketeering. Those are some really common ones that you'll see. And then, sometimes you'll see collusion. And of course, with a lot of these charges, you can also have conspiracy to do each one of those. Conspiracy is what we call an inchoate offense, and it doesn't merge into the crime. So you can be charged for, fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud, and so these are versus attempt. You can attempt it, but then once you've actually completed the crime, that attempt merges into the crime. And even if you weren't the brains of the operation or you weren't the money person in the operation, if you brought the two together, you connected them, correct, you might be part of that conspiracy. Yeah, I mean, there's a number of ways that conspiracy can be proven in that regard. Correct. I mean, as long as you've got some sort of meeting of the minds with someone else to further a crime, you can be charged with that crime as well as conspiracy to commit that crime. It depends if you've actually committed the crime, but if you haven't, then you can just be charged with conspiracy to commit that crime. Well, let's take that a step further. What might be some of the defenses to those kind of charges? There's factual impossibility, legal impossibility. Those are some two defenses. Insanity, depending on which state you're in, there's varying degrees of insanity. So these are some, unless it's a strict liability crime of some sort, which, in the white collar world, you don't see as much. If it's, these are some of the more common defenses that you'll see. And if it was just hypothetical, if it wasn't carried out, is that still a crime? If a number of people had, let's say, a meeting of the minds? I'm sorry, what were you saying? If it was just hypothetical, it was never actually carried out, but some people were going to, to set up this business or launch this company, is that a crime in itself, or it has to be actually carried out? I think it's got to be actually carried out. I mean, and it has to actually have been a completed crime in order for even a conspiracy to be charged with conspiracy. And at the end of the day, you have to convince an entire jury of people that this either happened or that there was a strong possibility that the individual was involved in the crafting of the scheme. Now, in these types of cases, I imagine there's a lot of prosecutorial discretion. So what are some ways, as an attorney, you could try to influence the prosecutor not to bring charges, or if you're one of the victims, to influence them to try to bring charges, even if there's no certainty of a conviction? So, prosecutorial discretion, I don't know that you influence necessarily a process. I guess I'm a little confused about your question. Well, you might say it's a very weak case, or no one was hurt. Yeah. Or, maybe there's people clamoring for the prosecution, and you're the attorney trying to dissuade the prosecutor from actually bringing charges. So, you're talking about from I'm representing the defendant. Yes, yes. Yeah. So, at that point, it's if you're typically not dissuading a person prior to charges dissuading a prosecutor prior to charges being made prior to allegations. So after that, you might start negotiating with opposing counsel as to why they might have a weak case, why you might have a strong case, why you might have strong defenses.
and try to, either through motion practice or conversationally, try to get them to drop the charges. But I think prior to a prosecutor filing charges against the defendant, you're really not. I mean, that kind of preemptive discourse really, in my experience at least, hasn't really existed.
I'd just like to remind our listeners that you're listening to Law You Should Know here on 90.3 WHPC from Nassau Community College in Garden City, New York. We're talking about white-collar crime and punishment with Shekar Jayaraman, and he's of counsel to the firm of Grant Park Legal Advisors in Chicago, Illinois. We're talking in general about these charges because the elements may vary from one state to another and in the state versus federal systems. Let's say you have a client who's being charged. What are some of the possible defense strategies? Let's start with, let's say, the jury selection. What type of juror would you want or not want?
It just really depends on, the crime, where you are in this country, what jurisdiction you're in, and the nature of or who your defendant is. I mean, there's so many variables that go behind it. There have been a number of times in my civil cases and in the few, I don't do much criminal work anymore. I'm mostly civil now, but when I was doing criminal work, it really depends.
What are some of the considerations? What are some of the considerations that will go into that process?
Some of the considerations are, if you are in rural South Dakota and you have an individual, who is from Chicago and who has committed a white collar crime, you're really probably not wanting even a jury trial at that point. I mean, in a case like that, you really want to know, is this jury going to be truly a jury of my client's peers, right? Is this someone that the jury is going to look at and be able to place themselves in the defendant's shoes and be able to really look at the facts the way that with an unbiased perspective. And
also if they might be willing to listen to your interpretation of the facts.
Absolutely. And so that's true. That's truly kind of how you want to go at it. And so that in that regard, you kind of do research of the landscape of where you are kind of trying your case.
As these cases are investigated or brought to trial, how strong is the attorney-client privilege? Is that attorney-client privilege covered no matter what goes on, between the attorney and client? Does it depend on whether some attorneys are defendants themselves as part of the scheme?
Yeah, I mean, you can't have a conflict of interest when you are defending somebody. So that's first. And so if you are conflicted or you're part of the scheme, you shouldn't be representing your client. Secondly, attorney-client privilege is extraordinarily serious and is absolute, with the exception that if you feel that your client is going to go and harm somebody or is going to go commit a crime and supposing your client comes to you and says, I'm going to go kill that person tomorrow, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that, you need to alert authorities of that fact. Other than that, you have to I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, let's say the client had discussed the scheme with an attorney or an attorney was part of it, would those conversations be protected? Like in let's talk about Donald Trump. Some of he's accused of various things, and some of the attorneys are pleading guilty and possibly going to testify against them. So under what circumstances could that happen, whether an attorney a defendant spoke to is going to be a witness for the prosecution?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess I've never found myself in that position, so I don't.
And I'm sure you're not going to be in that position, but
yeah. So I mean, I'm not. I really don't know. That's something that I would research if I was ever. Hopefully not, but in the event that I am, I would never scheme with my client. So I don't know what the answer to that is.
What is going to be successful possible defenses to those kind of charges? As if you couldn't get the court to dismiss it before the jury trial, what are some defenses that might get raised during the trial for the jury to consider or the trial judge to consider?
Yeah, I mean, like illegal impossibility is definitely one that like immediately pops to my mind. Is pretty much stating it's the belief that what the individual is being charged with isn't even a crime to begin with, and so it's kind of moot, or it should be moot. Likewise, factual impossibility. It would have been impossible for the individual to have even committed a crime, period, because it's not a crime, so, or not because it's not a crime, but because they couldn't have done it. So,
can you give us any kind of examples of those that we could work with?
or a legal impossibility might be that saying that somebody is accused of statutory rape, for example, right? And it turns out that the person, let's say it's a statutory age of, statutory age of 16 or 18, but the individual is above the age of 18, then that's a legal impossibility that the person was a minor.
Let's say the person is, I guess, in this, what would a successful defense, you as the attorney could argue to the jury that they didn't commit the elements of the crime or they didn't have an intent that was necessary to be convicted of a crime?
Well, they have to prove all the elements. I mean, the burden's beyond a reasonable doubt of the prosecution to prove every element of the crime. And so it's up to the defense to prove to the jury that, hey, the prosecution has not met their burden. And
they may have proven some things, perhaps, but not everything necessary. Yeah. And if they can't prove everything necessary,
that's where you have to convince a jury that, hey, it's not my job to prove necessarily that my client didn't do it. It's my job to prove to you that the prosecution has not proven their case.
And they have the burden.
Or to show you.
So if both sides are
they have the burden.
The prosecution hasn't met the burden. And if the case
exactly.
If the case goes to appeal, let's say unfortunately the person is convicted, might some of the issues be on appeal?
Some of the issues on appeal, I mean, a lot of times you're looking at misinterpretation of the law, right? And stating that, hey, this is what the prosecution has presented, and based on the law and based on the facts, even throughout motion practice, if there's any sort of gaps or holes, that's where you point it out in the appeals process.
So you would argue that maybe certain witnesses shouldn't have been allowed to testify, or perhaps some defense witness should have been allowed to testify?
I mean, beyond that there was any sort of legal technicalities that weren't observed properly throughout the process. And that's a number of reasons that could have happened.
It is important for the trial lawyer to make a record with motions Correct. Or with arguments to protect the record in case the case, in case there's a conviction, so that there can be a successful appeal and these issues can be raised on appeal.
Correct.
How has artificial intelligence or AI come into the picture of getting into trouble, potentially getting in trouble, or affected the preparation or trial of a case?
I think in theory, artificial intelligence could be helpful. We don't really use it much, mainly because there are so many areas where it could be problematic. So here's the thing. I embrace it, but use it, but always verify is kind of my mentality with artificial intelligence. Use it as a resource and as a tool, but don't rely on it.
I just want to take a moment to remind the listeners we're talking about white-collar crime and punishment and defenses. Our guest is attorney Shekar Jayaraman, and he's an attorney in Illinois, of counsel to the firm of Grant Park Legal Advisors. And we've been discussing some of the possible issues and charges arising out of white-collar crime, such as in the Sam Bankman-Fried case and perhaps some of the charges against President Trump. You're listening to Law You Should Know on 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nass Community College in Garden City, New York. If you want to listen to podcasts of this show or many others about other areas of law, just go to our website at nccradio.org. What are some areas that you think that charges involving white-collar crimes will be increased going into the future? Do you think the government and prosecutors are going to take a tougher line on some of these things, especially in light of Sam Bankman-Fried?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, if you look at some of the articles quoting the district attorneys and the AUSAs, it looks like they're having increasingly a zero tolerance policy for any sort of nefarious behavior, which I would tend to agree with. And it looks like they've been taking a hardline stance as far back as you can date on Wall Street to probably the mid 2000s. You've started seeing some real crackdowns on Wall Street. And I don't think that's going to end. Yeah, so I think it I don't know that I'm not sure if it'll increase or not, but if I had to guess, it would.
Are there various cycles and trends that shift from greater prosecution to less prosecution, or everyone does that, or the consumer should just beware?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen any. I mean, personally, I haven't seen any trends, but I think that it's always going to be. I think that this is something the government takes very seriously, as it should, and I think it'll just continue to either stay at the pace that it is or rise, especially with cryptocurrency becoming more prevalent.
And why is cryptocurrency fostering an increase in possible white collar crimes and their prosecution? I
think. I mean, I'm no crypto expert, but I think it's because that it's not necessarily as regulated as regular currency, and I think that there's a lot more room for nefarious behavior with cryptocurrency. So I think because of that, there may be more crackdowns in the future. And
the purchaser of the cryptocurrency may not know what they're actually getting or know when they've gotten it.
Yeah, I mean, I think something where I read is, in this particular case, he was taking some of the assets that were put into FTX and putting them in something called SBF. I think some people called it Sam coins. And then, so I think there was a lot of money that was just being transferred around unbeknownst to some of the investors. And
perhaps unbeknownst to some of the people at the company. And that's probably
absolutely, yeah.
That's something the securities laws don't allow, for the commingling or money invested for one purpose being used for something completely different.
Exactly, and so I think that he was able to do that for some time, and I think these are all just things that we're in a new space now of the digital era, and so it's ever evolving, kind of understanding and realizing that what's been happening for a long time is just happening in a different or could be happening in a different environment, and catching up to that.
And if people are being advised, or a business person being advised to invest money, and maybe it's someone who's not part of a securities deal, a broker, or a well-known company with perhaps internal safeguards, should they be extra concerned about that?
Absolutely. I think so. I think anytime that I always tell people, even if you're investing a penny or a dime, you need to know where that's going. You need to know how it's being used, and you need to verify that monies are not being commingled, and request statements as such regularly.
And you also should probably deal with a recognized company where there are many people
Absolutely.
at the helm, in case one is not up to par or not above board. And
Absolutely.
To protect it. And you may have some institution to look to if something happens to your money.
Absolutely. And you need to know up front, in the event something happens, what would potentially be my remedy. And you need to be advised of that by your attorney and by your financial experts. In the event something happens, what are my options?
And before you make the investment, you also want to consult with an independent financial advisor and perhaps an attorney to make sure that this is a safe investment and the risks involved.
Absolutely.
Any other cautions or comments you'd like to make about white-collar crime and punishment, and to avoid becoming a victim to some type of white-collar scheme?
Yeah, I mean, I think just classically speaking, the more pushy someone is for you to get involved in their company or in their investments, the more you really want to investigate why someone is selling it so hard. And due diligence, you just can never do enough due diligence.
So the more they try to push you, it must be done to now, and don't tell anyone about it, and don't consult anyone about it. You want to do the opposite. You want to slow it down. You want to bring in a competent lawyer and financial advisor and let them look at the details.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you got to do more than just a sniff test. So even if it looks good, even if it sounds good, still do all the due diligence in the world. Ask every question.
And if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. not
it
true.
probably is.
Okay.
Yes.
I'd like to thank our guest, Attorney Shekar Jayaraman, with the firm of Grant Park Legal Advisors of counsel to them in Chicago. As you've heard, we've just talked about general information about some of these aspects of the law, and we encourage everyone to avoid becoming a victim to white-collar or financial crime by seeking the advice of their independent attorney and financial advisor. If you missed any part of the program, it's at nccradio.org. And please join us next week at the same time for another program on law you should know here on 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nass Community College in Garden City, New York.